And we started on a just a 2-week series here last week, and dealing with the idea of faith versus emotion. And some of the things that I pointed out, I want to review a little bit just to get us back up to speed again, and then we'll go forward, and I hope to be able to finish this today. The first thing we did last week was define some terms. Faith is belief, trust, confidence, reliance in the ability, goodness, etc. of a person, in the efficiency of worth of a thing, or in the truth of a statement or a doctrine. Biblical faith requires the use of one's reason and critical faculties to discern the truth that one believes from the error that we're to avoid. Biblical faith is rational. It's a rational thing. We study, we apply reason to it. Like God said over in Isaiah, "Come now, let us reason together." And when Paul would go out and preach, he would reason in the synagogues. This is something that you apply reason to. It's a rational thing. We don't believe our doctrine just because we want to. It makes sense. When you put the pieces together, it's rational. And that's the way God wants it approached. Emotion, on the other hand, is a mental feeling or affection as distinguished from cognitive or volitional states of consciousness. Emotion is based on feeling, on feelings. It's not based on reason, and it's not based on critical faculties. It's based strictly on feelings. And therefore, it's not rational. Your emotions should never be the basis of a serious decision, ever. Have you ever made a major decision in your life based strictly on feelings alone, only to find out that you were wrong? I have. We have some teenagers in the room, and we have some people that contemplate things like marriage. Folks, don't get married based on feelings. Do not, while that's important, and you all know that I teach that it's nice for there to be a spark there, there's got to be more there than just the spark. To those, let me give you an example. And I hate for this to sound crude, but it's as honest as true as the day is long. If someone will cheat with you, they will cheat on you. Do not base your opinion of someone on just feelings. Be with them long enough to see how they act. Don't marry them 3 weeks after you meet them. Be there long enough to find out who it is that you're actually marrying. And when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. You're not going to change them. Girls, guys, you're not going to change them. If they are something, they are something. Trust them. Don't base things on feelings. Now, we went over the fact that human emotions are mentioned in Scripture, and they are. Joy, pleasure, love, anger, hatred, envy, fear. We covered all of those last week. And they can be good. Emotions can be good, or they can be bad, depending on how they're directed. But when emotions dominate, whether they're positive or negative, they obstruct the exercise of rational faith. If you let emotions run amok, then and you gear all of your decisions towards that, then you're going to make bad decisions. The odds are against you. This is one of the reasons that false religion, much like the Democrat Party, use feelings and emotion because they don't have truth. They don't have facts, so they use feelings. They tug at your heartstrings. They try to make you feel guilty. I pointed out last week that the first objection that Paul dealt with when he was explaining the doctrine of election over in Romans chapter 9 was that God's unrighteous for this. Is God unrighteous? Because of this, God forbid. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. That's the first objection that ever comes up. You start to talk about the doctrine of election with somebody, and the first thing they're going to say is, well, that's not fair. Well, I don't care if it's fair or not. That's emotional. That's not logical, and it doesn't line up with Scripture. And yet false religion is based on that. That's what, like last week, I talked about the altar call when they work up everybody's emotions to try to get them down to the front of the room and sign them up as a member. That's all based on emotion, and that's where false religion lives. That's why their preachers tell emotional, heart-wrenching stories to try to elicit a response. Whether the story's true or not doesn't matter. They're there to work on your emotions. That's why instrumental music is so important in those churches, because it's used as an emotion, as we'll see in a little bit. And one of the things we need to remember is that uncontrolled emotions leave somebody vulnerable to an attack. Proverbs 25:28 says, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Remember, back in those days, the way you defended a city was it was a walled city. You built a wall around it, and that protected you from attack. So he's saying that someone that's basing all their life on emotions strictly, they're just like a city where the walls don't exist, and they're ready to be attacked. That's where Satan lives, folks. He lives in the area of pulling at your heartstrings and trying to work your emotions so that you'll be guided by that rather than be guided by the truth. Uncontrolled emotion is also, and I made this point last week, it's inordinate affection. And it's something that should be mortified. Over in Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, it says, mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence. That's a longing for things that are forbidden. That's what evil concupiscence really amounts to. Any longing for something that you shouldn't be involved in. And covetousness, which is the state or desire of having more than you really do. Greediness, in other words. Which is idolatry, for which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience. So running amok with emotions, that's inordinate affection, and it's an excludable offense. Emotions are fine, but you got to keep them in check and never let them be the deciding factor when it comes to important decisions in your life. Now, that brings us up to date. Now, so the next point I want to make is that in Scripture, faith is placed in contrast to emotions, okay? Remember that compare and contrast thing that everybody hated in school? Well, this is the contrast. One over here, another over here. Faith is on one side, emotions is on the other. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. verses 13 and 14. 1 Thessalonians 4:13. But I would not have you to be ignorant, brother, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. You see, Paul is warning showing these people biblical truth of what's going to happen, but he's afraid that they might be overcome with emotions because there was a doctrine working its way through the Thessalonica church that if you die before Christ returns, then you're just dead and gone. Kind of like the Jehovah Witness doctrine of that you got to be alive at the time he returns, otherwise you just rot. And these people were getting emotional because they were being told this false doctrine, and Paul's trying to correct it. So the antidote to being overwhelmed with sorrow over death is faith in the truth, is knowing what the truth says. Over in Proverbs chapter 29, in verse 25, it says the fear is an emotion, folks. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. Being afraid of what man can do, there's no reason to be afraid of that. Put your trust in God. Don't be overtaken with fear of things that go on in this world. Trust God. God's in control of everything. God, you know what? God knows when you're going to die. God knows when your days are numbered. And you're not getting out of here until he's ready for you to get out of here. So there's no reason to be fearful of all this other stuff. Put your faith in. Now, don't go stand in front of a Peterbilt on Interstate 4 as it's barreling down the highway at 72 miles an hour or whatever. That's stupid. You don't do stupid stuff, but don't be afraid of every little thing that happens. There are folks that are, people. There are folks that don't have our hope, that are scared to death of everything. And you can see them to this day walking around wearing masks outside by themselves with not another human being within a mile and a half of them. They're afraid of, and that's emotion. That's how the government is controlling folks. That's what they prey on. Don't fall into it, and don't fall into it, and you don't need to. You've got God. Put your trust there. Over in Isaiah chapter 7, Isaiah is talking to King Ahaz, and he says in verse 9, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If ye will not believe, surely ye shall not be established. Now he's speaking these words to Ahaz, the king of Judah, when his heart was moved with fear. Look at verse 2. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Ahaz was scared to death that Assyria and Ephraim were going to come and knock and take him out. And that's why Isaiah said that if you don't believe, surely you won't be established. In this case, the emotion of fear had the upper hand. So it didn't matter what the prophet said. It didn't matter what the Bible said. His emotions had control of him. And in verse 4, Isaiah says this, and saying to him, take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted. For the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and of the son of Remaliah. But without faith, if Ahaz wouldn't believe God, wouldn't believe what the prophet was saying, wouldn't pay attention to what Scripture was saying, but was going to live in the world of emotion, he was not going to be established. Established means to render stable or firm, to confirm, to settle what is weak or wavering, to give calmness or steadiness to the mind, to calm anger. You see, if Ahaz believed what Isaiah was telling him, he could relax. He could be calm. He could understand that God had something else in mind and everything was going to be fine and he could be established. But as long as he let emotions run wild and not pay attention to what the prophet had to say, he wouldn't be calm. He wouldn't be settled. Does that make sense? Look at Psalm chapter 37. We're going to begin at verse 1. And I want you to notice in this passage that trust in the Lord, or faith, if you will, is commanded over and against envy and anger. And what are envy and anger? They are emotions. Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, so shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy ways unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil. You see, trust in the Lord. Have faith in the Lord. And don't fret, don't get emotionally involved in all this other stuff. Trust God. Because I'm going to tell you something. God can tell whether you trust him or not. He knows your heart. He knows what you want he knew what you wanted 15,000, or not 15,000, but 1,500 years ago. 1,000 years ago, he knew exactly what was on your heart and what would be there. So here's the deal. Change it and start trusting him. If you don't trust him already, start trusting him today. Because he knows what your desires are, and he's able to give you anything. He's going to give you what's good. Sometimes we don't want what's good, but that's what he's going to give you. But trust him, because in the end, it's going to work better than if you don't. And I'll tell you what, sometimes if emotions aren't checked, they'll consume you. I've made decisions at times when I had a feeling that something was going on and it wasn't, but I had the feeling, and ended up making bad decisions based on feelings. Had I just waited to look at the facts, maybe I wouldn't have made the bad decision. Now, here's something else I want you to take a look at. Turn to 1 John chapter 5. I remember Elder Gerald preaching on this one time. 1 John chapter 5, look at verses 2 and 3. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. Some people sometimes, we hear the verses that talk about loving your brethren, and sometimes people will go, well, I just have a hard time loving this person or that person because they did this or they did that, and I just don't feel like I can love them. Well, biblical love, folks, is keeping the commandments toward them. As Conrad used to always say, you can love somebody without liking them very much. It's possible not to be buddy-buddy with somebody and still love them because you keep the commandments toward them. You look out, and eventually, over time, that relationship may become a lot sweeter than you could have ever imagined. By keeping the commandments towards someone else, and the two of you working mutually together, even though you may not have anything in common, even though you ordinarily you wouldn't even end up being friends, but that relationship of keeping commandments together will bring that together and make it much sweeter than any of the others that you just run into that are based strictly on emotion. Okay? Over in John chapter 14, here's the converse, or the flip side of this. John 14 and verse 21. Jesus says, he that hath my commandments and keepeth them, he it is that loveth me, and he that loveth me shall be loved of my Father, and I will love him and will manifest myself to him. Look at verse 24. He that loveth me not keepeth not my sayings, and the word which ye hear is not mine, but the Father's which sent me. You want to know if you love Christ or not? It's not an emotional thing. Are you keeping his commandments? Are you doing what he told you to do? If you are, then you're showing the fact that you love him. If you're not, well, to the degree that you're not, you're certainly not showing that. If God says do this and such and you refuse to do it, well, you're not showing much love to him. And that's how you know. And remember, God knows your heart. There is an emotional dimension to Christian love, but it also subdues ungodly emotions and experiences the emotion of joy, not in iniquity, but in the truth. As it says over in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Rejoice not in iniquity, but in the truth. That's that experience of joy in truth. And Christian love is love with faith in the truth. Look at Ephesians chapter 6. And verse 23. Peace be to the brethren, and love with faith from God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Grace be with all them that love our Lord Jesus Christ in sincerity. Well, how do you know if you love Christ in sincerity? You're keeping the commandments. You're doing what he told you to do. And in John chapter, or 2 John chapter 1, well, actually there's only one chapter, 2 John verse 1, the elder unto the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth. And not I only, but also all they that have known the truth, for the truth's sake, which dwelleth in us and shall be with us forever. Now, let's consider the emotion of joy. That's one of the ones that we went through last time. I don't remember, I don't have it in front of me, how many times this word occurs in Scripture, but I referred to it last week. But let's consider this emotion of joy or pleasure. The joy that is the fruit of the Spirit comes from something. You see, it's not just joy for the sake of joy. The joy that's the fruit of the Spirit is something that you receive from doing something. Look at Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there's no law. So this is the joy that comes from the fruit of the Spirit. Look at Acts 13:48. We're going to have to turn to a few passages here. Acts 13 and verse 48. Now this is after the preaching of the gospel. And it says, and when the Gentiles heard this, when they heard the gospel, they were glad and glorified the word of the Lord, and as many as were ordained to eternal life believed. And look at verse 52, as a result of this, and the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Ghost. When they heard the truth, that brought them joy. That's the joy that's the fruit of the Spirit. It rejoices in the truth. The fact that you finally understand that you're not on a treadmill, that you have to run for the rest of your life and hope to God that the minute you die, you were on the right path and not the wrong. There's a scene from the play Hamlet where Hamlet, he wants to kill the king because the king killed his father, and the king was actually his father's brother, so he was Hamlet's uncle. And there's a scene where Hamlet's just about ready to do it, and he notices his uncle in the chapel praying, and he stops and he says, well, that doesn't work. Because if, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not speaking Hamlet, but the idea being if I killed him now, he'd go to heaven. So what kind of a reward is that? I got to wait until he's in the middle of sinning before I kill him, okay? I don't know, why did I go there? Well, I'm going to be 70, you know. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, when these Gentiles, when they heard the gospel, and they heard, oh, that's where I was going. I was talking about these other religions where you got to keep running on the hamster wheel all the time. And that's what Hamlet believed, because that's what Shakespeare believed. He was as Arminian as anybody else. And you can see that you can see that doctrine coming out of his plays. And in this was a case where, well, if I do this now, I'm going to reward the guy. See, because now he's there's so many religions that do that. They teach that constantly, that you got to stay on that treadmill all the time. If you ever get off the treadmill, well, now you're going to end up going to hell. Is that in the Bible, folks? No. There's nowhere you're going to find that in the Bible. But it works on your emotion. It'll work there, but it doesn't work when it comes to truth. Look at Romans chapter 15. In verse 13. Now the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that ye may abound in hope through the power of the Holy Ghost. Where do you think this hope and joy comes from? It comes from God, and it comes from the Holy Ghost, and it arrives in your believing of the truth. It's a gift, folks. That's why they call it a gift of the Spirit. That's the joy that you want. You don't want the joy that just comes based on a lie, because that's the joy that you get naturally. You want the joy of the Spirit that is a gift that comes from God. And you get that joy from believing the truth. And the more you believe it, the more joy you get. Just how it works. The more you believe it, the more faith you get. The more you believe it, the more long suffering you get. That's how you get the gifts of the Spirit, by exercising faith and believing what God said. Well, how do you know whether you believe it? You do it. God says do something, you go do it because you believe God. You know, the Bible refers to Abraham. It says Abraham believed God and he counted it to him for righteousness. It doesn't say he believed in God. Devils believe in God. No, Abraham believed God. God said do this, so he did it. God said take your son up here on a hill and sacrifice, so he did it. Well, God tells you to do something, folks, do it. And that's where joy comes from. And there's no way for me, you know, this is one of those things, it's kind of like when at my ordination, I remember Ben Mott telling me there's no way that you can understand what you're getting yourself into until this happens. There's no way that I can explain it to you. And you'll find out when you get there. And he was right. My dad used to tell me a lot of those kind of things when I was younger. You know, there's no way for me to explain to you this, but you'll find out when you got kids of your own. You'll realize it then. Well, it's the same way here. I can't tell you what this feels like, but I can tell you that it's worth the effort to do it, to just do what God told you to do. You know, we buck against this constantly. You see it, you go, I don't like that. Well, do it anyway. I don't care if you like it, do it. And when you come out of it, there's a reward there for you that you won't get if you don't do it. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 6. Talking about these Thessalonians that had believed the gospel, and it says, and you became followers of us and of the Lord. You see, these people became disciples, having received the word in much affliction. You know what? It's a sad thing, but it happens. You remember when Christ was baptized, he went through 40 days of temptation out in the wilderness. And we see that happen with people now. They join the church and they go through about 40 days of temptation out in the wilderness. And they get attacked from every different direction that you can possibly think of. And a bunch of directions that you never would have even expected. But it happens. Doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to enough people that they understand this idea of receiving the word with much affliction. But then it continues with joy of the Holy Ghost. Joy of the Holy Ghost. Once you get through that, once you make it through that, well, then there's the reward. Don't be one of the ones that was cast, the seed that landed on the hard pan. Be the one that grows roots and sprouts up. And to do that, you just got to get with it. You just got to stay there and trust God and believe that He'll do what He said. The whole purpose of God writing this book, 66 books within this. You know why it was written? You know why the apostles went through all the trouble to write the New Testament? You know the reason for that? Well, let's take a look and see. Look at John chapter 15. John 15 and verse 11. These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. Now, Jesus is talking to the apostles here. Now, look at 1 John chapter 1 and verse 4. What did the apostles do with it once they got it? 1 John chapter 4. I'm sorry, 1 John chapter 1 and verse 4. And these things write we unto you. Let's go back. Let's look at verse 3, just so we make sure we know who we're talking about here. That which we have seen and heard declare we unto you, that ye also may have fellowship with us, and truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. And these things write we unto you, that your joy may be full. That's the reason that God gave us the Bible, folks. He gave us the Bible so that we understand, so that we can understand that if we will just do what God says, then we will receive these gifts. We'll get the gifts of the Spirit. Now, here's the hooker. If you're not one of God's children, you can't do what the Bible said. If you can do what the Bible said, you know what that says? That's an evidence that you're one of God's children. And as a result of that, knowing that when you leave this life, which is very, very short anyway, but when you leave this life, you got something better in store for you. That should trigger a little bit of joy. I know that there's problems that we got to deal with as we live this life. I'm going to be 70 years old this week. I never thought I'd make 30 when I was in my 20s. And, you know, I mean, looking forward, 70 years seems like an eternity. Looking backwards, it was about a week and a half ago that I was a little kid having my diaper changed. It goes by like that. And if I live another 10, that other 10 is going to go by even quicker. We're not here very long. We're going to be dead a whole lot longer than we were ever alive. And hopefully we're in a better place once we leave here. Well, how do you know? You see, if you're one that worries about those kinds of things, if you're one that frets over where you're going to end up, well, the Bible says that means you're one of God's children, because the people that aren't God's children, they couldn't care less. Oh, they might mouth the words, they might sit, but they don't really think about it. They don't wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, scared to death they're going to end up in hell. I did, until I saw the truth. And the more I believe the truth and the more I act on the truth, the more convinced I am. In Psalm chapter 119 and verse 111, thy testimonies have I taken as an heritage forever, for they are the rejoicing of my heart. You see, John said that they wrote the Bible that our joy may be full. And David said that those testimonies, that scripture that was written, is his heritage because they're the rejoicing of his heart. Again, that's where that joy comes from. Jeremiah chapter 15. And verse 16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of mine heart, for I am called by thy name, O God of hosts. You see, to a child of God, this scripture, believing it and acting on it, brings joy. And this is not joy alone or joy for the sake of joy. It's joy inseparably connected with the Word of God. We're told over in Nehemiah chapter 8 and verse 10 that this joy is the believer's strength. So understand, Satan is going to try to substitute this joy with anything he can try to substitute it with to get you away from this book. And be ready, because he'll do it. I mean, think about this. Satan succeeded in getting Eve to focus on the pleasure that the forbidden fruit offered and drew her into transgressing the law. And one of the characteristics of perilous times, look over at 2 Timothy. And this has come down through history. You look at every civilization, starting all the way back. Look at Egypt. Look at Assyria. The Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the United States of America. Look at every great civilization, and there's one thing that you can guarantee. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. Look at verses 4 and 5, where it talks about traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. And Paul tells Timothy, from such turn away. A characteristic of perilous times is men loving pleasures more than they love God. And you look at every civilization, and when they get to that point where they love pleasure more than they love God, their days are numbered. Every one of them has fallen. Don't be surprised when this one does as well, because you think about this. How many true churches are left here in the United States of America anymore? This is where the church came from, out of Europe. When they finally got chased out of Europe, they landed here. And the South used to be full of old-timey Baptist churches like this one. They were everywhere. You couldn't, as Wendy says, you couldn't swing a cat by the tail without hitting 2 or 3 of them. They were everywhere. And now they're numbered. Look at the news. Turn on a television set. Do people not love pleasure more than they love God today in this land? Absolutely. And that's a characteristic that Satan's winning the battle in this country. When men will love what they feel more than they love God, and remember, we're talking about religious people here. That chapter is written about a church, but they deny the power of godliness, and the power of godliness ain't emotion, folks. The power of godliness is the Word of God effectually working in the believer, and they deny that. And one of the things that they use a lot in churches nowadays, and I mentioned this last week, if having, well, you know, I remember seeing somewhere once that you're not a musician because it's what you do. You're a musician because it's who you are. And music has been a huge part of my life. And yet you don't see a band in here, do you? Because God doesn't want bands in his church. You know why? Because music works the emotions. That's the reason that they have bands in churches nowadays. It's to get the emotions going. And music can drown out the consideration of God's word and leave the soul in ignorance. Look at Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. And, well, look at verse 11. Let's get the context. Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night, till wine inflameth them. And the harp and the viol, the tabret and the pipe and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. Therefore my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude cried with a thirst. One of the reasons that God sent the nation of Israel into captivity was because they started headed towards emotion, folks. And they were playing their music, and they were having their wine, and they were dealing with their parties, but they weren't studying God's word. And as a result, God sent them into captivity to teach them a lesson. And there's a lot of folks that have made religion out of music instead of out of truth. Not a lot of truth in those places. Maybe a lot of music, but not much truth. Look at Revelation chapter 18. Verses 21 and 22. Revelation 18:21. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with thy violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of the harpers, not you, Jeremy, just that's referring to like playing an instrument. So yeah. The voice of the harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. A lot of music going on in that church that God destroyed in there. Satan's got a lot of music going on in his church. Look at Isaiah 14:11. Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials, the worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. And look who he's speaking with. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. So here's a challenge. We're running a little bit tight here on time. See how much more I've got to finish up. Okay. Here's a challenge to the believer. Number one, seek wisdom and seek understanding foremost rather than pursuing feelings. Seek for wisdom. Look at Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 7. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. It's wisdom and spiritual understanding. It's by that we know the will of God, not in feelings. You don't feel the will of God. You know the will of God. Look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. Colossians 1, 9 and 10. For this cause we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you, and to desire that you might be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. Notice, no emotion here. Wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you might walk worthy of the Lord, unto all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God. That's what Paul prayed for to these Colossians. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 6. Let's go back, look at verse 5. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that ye should do so in the land, whether you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them. For this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Moses didn't tell these people to go off and base their decisions on their emotions. You know what they did at one time, if you remember when he was up on the mount, they based some decisions on emotions, and they built a cow made out of gold, and they worshiped that as gold, as God. That's not how Moses approached it. No, use your brain. Don't use your heart on this. Now, I know I've made the point before, and I'll make it again, that when someone is converted to the understanding of the truth, it starts up here in the brain, and then eventually it transfers to the heart, to where it's not just mind thinking. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense from the heart. But that's not the same as following the heart and ignoring the brain. Use the understanding. Value what you know above what you feel. If you know something, you might not feel that. You might feel something different. If the Bible says in black and white, A, B, C, but you feel X, Y, Z, folks, A, B, C is the correct answer, not the X, Y, Z. Don't trust your feelings over the Word of God. If your feelings line up with the Word of God, well, then you're in the right place. But if your feelings go contrary to what God said, you got to adjust your feelings. You don't adjust God's Word based on what you think. Look at Proverbs chapter 8. Verses 10 and 11. Proverbs 8:10. Receive my instruction and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. Knowledge and wisdom of the Scriptures is worth more than all the money on planet Earth, folks. Look around the room. It's rare. It's rare that people even find it. Usually things that are rare have value. And this is a guard against being led away by powerful emotions of false religion. Proverbs chapter 7 is talking about false religion a little bit. Let's see what it says in verses 1 through 5. My son, keep my words and lay up my commandments with thee. Keep my commandments and live, and my law is the apple of thine eye. Bind them upon thy fingers, write them upon the table of thine heart. Say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman, that they may keep thee from the strange woman. There's your false religion, folks. From the stranger which flattereth with her words. Look at Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. Notice, false religion flatters you, makes you feel good, makes you feel proud of what you're, right? It's flattery. Proverbs 5, 1 through 3. My son, attend unto my wisdom and bow thine ear to my understanding, that thou mayest regard discretion, and that thy lips may keep knowledge. For, as a contrast, the lips of a strange woman drop as a honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. Soft speeches, flattering words. And so this is a guard against being led away by evil men who will lead you into unrighteousness. Look at Proverbs chapter 2, verses 10 through 15. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things, who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil and delight in the frowardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and they froward in their paths, to deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger which flattereth with her words. Knowledge and understanding of God's word delivers you from that. Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 26. He that trusteth in his own heart is a fool, but whoso walketh wisely, he shall be delivered. Don't trust in your emotions. Unless they line up with God's word, do not trust in your emotions. And don't get stuck in them, because they will distract you from the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Verses 29 through 32. 1 Corinthians 7, 29. And they that weep as though they weep not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possessed not, and they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of this world, how he may please his wife. You see, the idea is that you get involved in things here in the world, you get involved in your emotions, it'll pull you away from God. And that's what, now, Paul's not saying don't get married. If you're married, stay married. But be careful with what you do. Notice what he was saying here. They that weep as though they wept not. Yeah, things are going to bother you, but don't let it control you. And rather than letting emotions control your faith, let your faith control your emotions. What you believe is the thing that's important. What God wrote is what's important. Make sure that any of those emotions line up with the book. If they don't, then they don't. Cast them aside. And seek to do the will of God rather than your own pleasure, and you'll find pleasure in the Lord. Turn to Isaiah chapter 58. Verses 13 and 14. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and calleth the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. There's your marching order, folks. God speaking to his children. If you'll pay attention to the things that God commands you, and you will do what God has asked you to do, then you will delight in doing what God has asked you to do. It's not grievous. It may appear to be at the beginning, but if you will just do it, you will learn that it's not, and you will find your joy in that rather than in pleasures here in the world. And you will learn that faith is much more important than emotion. With that, I thank you for your very kind and patient attention this morning. Let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.